All right, let's go to the polling stuff because Morning Joe over on MSNBC had an absolute meltdown over some new polls that show that Joe Biden's not doing so well against our big beefy boy. Let's watch.
What are the polls telling us directionally about the race?
I understand there's a difference, though, with the New York Times Siena poll, and you know this. It's given disproportionate impact. This year, this cycle, it is skewed wildly in Donald Trump's direction. Hold on. Yeah. And the New York Times feasts on it with clickbait stories like a dozen at a time.
And what I'm trying to focus on is what I think people should pay attention to.
But what I'm trying to focus on is the New York Times right now is actively shaping the election cycles where this poll comes out on a Sunday and on Monday people go, oh, and I heard it. And I'm sitting there going, oh, don't be so stupid. That's why we're doing this.
So what's
hold on a second.
What's your theory about why?
No, hold on. What I hear is after these Siena polls come out, every time New York Times poll is, oh, well, everything that Joe Biden's done since the State of the Union address, all this money that he's put out, all of the campaigning is for naught. No, it's not. No, it's not. There's one poll that's wildly skewed every time after every New York Times Siena poll comes out. It completely changes the political battlefield out there for about a week and a half. It distorts the questions that are asked of the White House. It distorts the questions that are asked of Donald Trump. It distorts all of the opinion. It distorts everything. And that keeps happening every month when this comes out. And then finally, about 2 weeks later, after the residue of the New York Times Siena poll leaves, people go, oh, I think Joe Biden's on a winning streak. And then 2 weeks later, it comes out again, and it's garbage. It's an outlier.
Okay, Joe Scarborough sounds like Trump and sounds like MAGA there. Because what Trump famously does, and everybody knows this, is he'll only cite the polls where he's winning, and usually the ones where he's winning by a lot. Yeah. And he'll try to pretend like this means that this is across the board and this is unanimous and everybody knows I'm winning. And the MAGA people will call any polls that are bad for Trump fake news. They call the ones that are good for Trump, like they parrot those, like those are phenomenal.
I was going to start citing the liberal equivalent of cat turd polls on Twitter.
No, but literally, that's what we're witnessing. We're witnessing the resistance liberals become one. I mean, they've already been like MAGA in a million different ways, but this is a million and one ways now because this is embarrassing, man. Are you really so dumb that you think it's not possible for him to be down 4 points in a national poll or 6 points in a national poll? Or it's been consistent that he's down in the swing states. What I've been seeing for months and months and months is in 5 to 7 of the states, he's been losing, and the margins in some of those states are actually pretty freaking devastating. So your response to that is to shove your head in the sand and pretend like, no, actually, he's winning and this is fake news. I mean, that's what he's doing. It's a fake news accusation. But like, notice there's no actual explanation as to why he thinks it's fake. He just, oh, it's an outlier. Is it?
It's not.
Is it?
That's
because what I've seen is that, when you look at the average of polls, it's roughly tied. If anything, Trump has a slight lead right now. Not that long ago, it was the opposite, where Biden had a little lead, but now it's shifted back in Trump's direction. So you're not even making, hey, look at the methodology. Hey, they oversampled this group or that group. He's outlier, fake news. It's not. It's not.
It's not. And I mean, okay, so in this poll, it has Biden down 13 points in Nevada.
I thought it was 14.
13.
Wow.
He's getting 30% of the vote in a state that he won. He got 50% of last time around. And even if that is off by 10 points, you're still screwed. You are still screwed. So rather than dealing with that, actually my favorite part of that clip is how John Heilman's like trying to very tepidly, well, if you look at the trajectory, like maybe we should consider. And they're like, no, absolutely not. This is fake news. I was ready for him to pull out like, this is Kremlin, Russian propaganda or something from the New York Times.
That's coming next.
It was just as unhinged. They do these clickbait stories. Yeah, of course they're going to put stories in their newspaper about their poll that they commission. And by the way, if this poll showed a different result, you would be talking about it glowingly in all the ways as well. So to me, this seemed to me like 2 things are going on. 3 things are going on. Number one, the people that are at that table, they're in their own little tightly controlled bubble, and they don't really know many Trump supporters. So it is so directly at odds with their own experience of the world, they just can't accept it, right? It can't possibly be that there are people out there who are going to vote for Donald Trump in these. It can't possibly be that our great savior, Joe Biden, is down by this. Just can't possibly be. Something else must be going on here. That's number one. Number two, this is what the MSNBC audience desperately wants to hear. So he's also delivering for his audience what exactly, the perspective that they want to get in the morning. And number three, we know that Joe is in direct contact, Joe Scarborough is in direct contact with Joe Biden himself and the Biden White House and campaign team. So I also think this comes directly from them. And I mentioned before, there was an Axios article about how Biden and his top advisors, they just don't believe the polls. They're in this is like, the Mitt Romney campaign era, hashtag unskew the polls on the Democratic side now. It doesn't matter what data comes out. They don't believe it, when the truth of the matter is these New York Times polls, they overstated Joe Biden's support last time there was a Biden-Trump race. So if anything, you'd be concerned in that direction. Now, to put the other side of it out there, in the midterms, when you looked race by race, especially Senate race by race, the state polls, they were a little more favorable towards the Republicans than the result ended up being. But even that was a mixed bag in terms of, the states and they understated the Republican support in the national House poll. So even that was a mixed bag. The best you could say is like, yeah, we take them with a grain of salt because the polls have been a little bit all over the place. Okay, fair enough. But this is garbage. It's ridiculous because I don't like it. And how dare you even consider this to be credible?
So what is true is that in the primary polls on the Republican side, Trump has been consistently overestimated in those polls by 7 to 8 percentage points. And then when it actually comes time to vote, he underperforms. But to your point, even if you factor for that, he loses the election because he's down more than that in Nevada and Georgia and Arizona, which now Arizona, I call that a must-win for the Democrats now, because this is the sort of suburban retired folks who have flocked to Biden in the past because they view Trump as too extreme. Now if Arizona is going to the Republicans, so in other words, it really is just shoving their head in the sand. Even if you want to account for whatever sort of dynamic they're talking about to one extent or another, you're still missing the mark. Because, by the way, I pulled up the Real Clear Politics average of the national polls here. Granted, national is not as important. State by state, swing state is important.
Right.
But in the average right now, Trump is up 1.1 percentage points. And look, here's the thing. To your point about them being in a bubble, they dismissed the Gaza protest like it's nothing.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden, in order to win the presidential election, he needs to do what he did last time with young voters, which is win young voters by 30 percentage points or more. Now there's a number of polls that have Trump up with young voters. And even if you want to say, hey, it's not going to be that bad, it's not going to be doomsday, even if you just give Biden a 10-point win with young voters in the election, you're still losing.
Right.
So maybe don't, and it's their bias. It's their own bias. They can't help but look at these kids and have scorn and disdain for them and disgust for them. They smear them and say they support Hamas, and that's why they're protesting, or they wake up in the morning and have a passionate hatred for all Jews, and that's why they're getting out there in the street. It's very clearly because they want to stop the genocide and divest their own universities from Israel. That's the point. But they're not taking them at face value. They're not steel-manning their argument. They're straw-manning their argument. And as a direct result of swatting this story aside like it's nothing, you can see the bubble that they're in. It's like, no, that matters. It matters how young voters vote. It matters how Arab Americans and Muslim Americans vote, because there's key demographics in important swing states. You can't just swat that aside, you fucking idiots.
So in this poll, they found 13% of the people who had voted for Biden in 2020 and now were not going to vote for Biden, it was over Israel-Gaza. So, I mean, and it's very clear that even just that shift alone would be enough to doom him because of how close it was last time around. And he's got problems in other parts of the coalition as well. I mean, most of the voters who are shifting away from him are young, or they're Black, or they're Latino. The one demographic that is really sticking with him, which is why he does a little better in like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, than in Arizona, the Sunbelt states, is old white people. They're sticking by Joe Biden. They're still there and they're rock solid, et cetera, which is, the constituency that Scarborough is not only a part of, but that he's also broadcasting to. But it struck me when you were making the MAGA comparison, there's another very direct comparison here to be made with MAGA because, in the Stop the Steal stuff, their thing was always like, oh, the Trump results were rigged. But any of the results that went well for Republicans, those were all fine and good. Well, in this poll, the suggestion here is basically like the poll's rigged and it's fake news, et cetera. But they don't seem to have a problem with the results that show down ballot, that every single Democrat is winning their races down ballot. And to me, that spells even more of a problem for Joe Biden because we have seen in these special elections, we have seen Democrats perform well, and Roe versus Wade being really determinative and that being very important. So you look at that, and on the one hand, you're like, okay, well, maybe that means just every Democrat is going to benefit from that. The other possibility is every sort of like generic Democrat's going to benefit from it, but Joe Biden's his own case. And that seems to be what this poll at least is indicating is going to happen. Yeah, generic Democrat running for Senate wherever, fine. Joe Biden is a separate matter. This man is a drag on the Democratic ticket. He is the worst performer of every single candidate. All the Senate candidates, they tested everything. He is the worst performer. And so in a sense, I think he sort of has to live in his dreamland, because the only other thing, if you're going to acknowledge reality, you have to acknowledge the fact that by deciding to run again, you are risking handing the White House back to Donald Trump, because you are profoundly and uniquely unpopular in terms of a Democratic candidate.
They never have forgotten early in the Democratic primary in 2020 when they were underestimated, when they did horrible in the first three states.
Exactly right.
And that's what they will always hang on to.
Yeah.
So in his mind, I am perpetually underestimated because of that instance. But things change, man. Donald Trump was Teflon for a while. Everybody thought he was Teflon. Then he lost the 2020 election and got hit with 14 different kinds of fraud charges that he lost the cases and now has to pay $1 gazillion. Things change.
Yeah.
Things are fluid, not stagnant. And they don't realize it. And it's a terrifying scenario, because if you believe, like I do, that Trump actually is an existential threat, then it's like, you're literally the last guy you should be running this race. Like, literally the last one.
Yeah. I think, I mean, that's what the data shows at this point. He is a drag on the Democratic ticket. And, you know, right now it shows a lot of split ticket voting, where like in that Nevada poll, Biden's down by 13. The Democratic Senate candidate is basically like tied up maybe a point or two, but in the margin of error.
Jeez.
It's very unlikely you're going to see actually that much split ticket voting on election day, just judging by recent history. And so, you know, Biden could be the reason not only that the White House is lost for Democrats, but that the Senate is lost for Democrats, and they're unable to pick up the House because he's that much of a drag on the Democratic side. That's at least very much that's what this poll looks like, and that is very much in the realm of possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.